Hey guys, welcome to another video. Today we're taking a look at the Audioquest Dragonfly Cobalt. This is a really tiny USB DAC amp combo that could potentially be really useful for somebody like me. This video is made possible by the folks over at headphones.com. I highly encourage everybody to check out the community section there and see what everybody else is saying about this as well. I'm often at work in a situation where I have to listen to something on my laptop, and the onboard audio in here is absolutely atrocious. So to me, a product like the Dragonfly Cobalt is potentially really useful. At the moment, I'm using the Radson Ear Studio ES100, and this uses an older AKM DAC, whereas the Dragonfly Cobalt uses one of the newer ESS DACs. I'm going to attempt to answer 3 questions that I've had in my mind when it comes to something like this. The first is, can it power the headphones that I care about? These are the headphones that I would typically take with me if I'm either on a trip or going to work. The second question I want to answer with the Cobalt is, how does it perform with noise floor for the Campfire Andromeda? The Andromeda is a highly sensitive IEM that on most equipment will be able to show if there's noise floor. For a lot of headphones that aren't as sensitive, this isn't as much of a problem, but for the Andromeda, it is quite picky. To give you an example, if I plug it into the V30, there is a huge noise floor which completely ruins it. The ES100 is quite a bit better, but I've also tried other high-end digital audio players that surprisingly also have a bit of noise floor there. So the question is going to be, can the Dragonfly Cobalt pair with the Andromeda well enough to the point where there is no noise floor whatsoever, there's no background hiss or anything like that? And lastly, the third question I'm going to attempt to answer is, does the ESS DAC in here, which is one of the newer ones, does it cause the same issues that I've had with ESS DACs in the past? Were they able to implement it in a way that makes it so that that little bit of harshness for the treble in the Andromeda isn't actually that bad? I'm not anticipating this DAC to dramatically outperform any of my other DACs or make a huge difference in terms of overall sound quality, resolution, or anything like that. I would never expect a DAC to take a headphone from mediocre resolution to incredible resolution on its own, unless you were going from something that was onboard like what's in my laptop right now. But that's more a case of going from nothing to something. Yes, there is a DAC in there, but it is one of the worst performing DACs I've ever heard in my life. So anything will be better than that. Keep in mind, this is my very first impressions, first look. I haven't had any chance to use this at all yet, and actually it's still in its box. I haven't taken it out of the packaging yet. So let's take a look. So here's what you get. This is the little pouch, this is the DAC unit, and then this is the Dragon Tail, I believe it's called. Interestingly, the width of the Cobalt is about the same as the plug that you use to connect it to whichever device you're using. It is very similar to the size of a USB stick. I believe this is a little bit smaller than the Red and then the older units, but that's all I'm really aware of for physical differences, apart from the slightly different shape and the blue color. Just for a size comparison here, this is the Radson ES100. The idea is that if you want to use it with your phone, this is sort of like an on-the-go cable that fits nicely with this. I believe you can use this with the USB Type-C connection on a laptop as well, but you don't need to because this will already work in most systems. So the first thing I'm going to try here is the Focal Elegia. I don't normally use this cable because it's kind of terrible. Alright, you're ready to rock. Alright, so at first it was way too loud, so keep that in mind. I mean, these are not super difficult to drive. Start at a lower volume. The LED on the Dragonfly Cobalt turned to purple, so I guess that means that it's properly using MQA. At least that's my hunch. Let's keep going. Let's move on to now the more difficult to drive Mr. Speaker's Aeon. It's interesting, it does fit fairly securely in here. When I was pulling it out, it didn't feel like this was gonna move at all, so that's kind of good. Before the Ether 2 came out, this is like the most comfortable planer you could get. It's just so comfy and light. Definitely still an ESS DAC. Between the onboard and the Cobalt, it's a huge difference, unsurprisingly. My first impression here is that yes, it absolutely can drive these planers. They're not super difficult to drive, but they're difficult enough where I would want a little bit of power there. Of course, I still can't compare it with the Dragonfly Red or the Dragonfly Black because I haven't heard those. It does have a distinctively different sound to what the Radson ES100 has, which is a lower end AKM DAC. Not a huge difference, but it definitely feels crisper on the ESS DAC, but I don't always necessarily think that that is a good thing, especially for some IEMs like the Campfire Andromeda, which potentially have a little bit of sharpness in the treble that I like to smooth over a little bit. So let's give that a shot. I'm gonna turn it way down because these are very sensitive, and last time that was super loud when I just plugged it in. The song fades out, and that's usually where you can hear some background hiss if the source doesn't match all that well. Wow, that's dead silent. That is dead silent. I think it even does better on that track than the ES100. Still green right now. Let's switch to the purple one. I think it's purple, like it's supposed to be purple. Keep in mind that this is also a less than 1 ohm output impedance, and the Andromeda is very picky with its sources. I know a lot of people prefer it with maybe like 1 to 2 ohms output impedance because some of the bass can be a bit much, at least in good listening environments, but I actually kind of like the way that the bass responds to a low ohm output impedance on the Andromeda, so less than 1 ohm is actually fine for me. Supposedly with the slow roll-off filter that they've added here, which, to be honest, I generally don't hear a difference when switching filters on DACs. I don't notice much, if anything. The theory behind this is that, yeah, the Sabre DACs are a little bit sharp, but with one of these filters, it might be able to be a little bit smoother as a result. So I have a number of takeaways from my brief first impressions of the Audioquest Dragonfly Cobalt. The first one is that it is powerful enough to drive most headphones out there right now, especially these days when headphones are getting easier and easier to drive. Even when testing this with the Mr. Speaker's Aeon, which does require a little bit of power, it's not high impedance, but it's also not high sensitivity. So even when testing it with that, I had to turn the volume way down out the gate. I couldn't run this at what the default setting was for the volume. So keep that in mind if you are picking up one of these. Turn the volume down before you play anything because it is pretty darn loud and pretty darn powerful. The second takeaway with this for me is that it is probably one of the better choices for the Campfire Andromeda. This is considerably better than the V30 for the Andromeda, which doesn't work at all. There's a horrible background noise with the V30 and the Andromeda. But beyond that, the ESS DACs have a reputation for being a little bit on the sharp side, and where a lot of us are maybe looking for something a little bit smoother, especially with some of the gear that we do have. And so again, for the Andromeda, this was a really good pairing. And it seems to me like what Audioquest has done here is they haven't just continued along the same trend of sharpness. And really, I don't know if that's a good thing or a bad thing. I think there's a lot of people who prefer the traditional sounding ESS stuff with whatever headphones that they use, and actually think, especially for people who have like those HD 650s and whatnot, I think the ESS stuff's actually pretty darn good. But for something like the Andromeda, there are those of us who just won't use an ESS DAC with it. It's just a little bit too on the sharp side that makes that treble a little bit harsh. Now with this, it is still an ESS presentation, but it's not as noticeable as the ODAC or the DAC in my phone, for example, which is also an ESS DAC. Now, whether that's to do with the slow roll filter that they added, or whether that's to do with this being one of the newer ESS DACs. I'm not sure. But at the very least, the result is interesting enough where it's probably worth taking a look at if you do own a Campfire Andromeda. Maybe I'll consider doing a full review of this in the future and properly putting it through its paces. But for the moment, you can check out what a lot of people are saying in the forum section of the headphone community on headphones.com. Anyways, thanks for taking the time to watch this, and I'll see you guys in the next video.